So first up for Open Recognition Networks is Susanna Gurr. Right, and then it goes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm a bit of a newbie to open badges, and actually I have to admit I feel a bit like an outlier here, but I think Don was really brilliant in having me open this session because you can tell from the title here, I'm a researcher and an evaluator, and I think this is really Don's attempt to highlight the need for a very diverse collaboration on this front. So I'm going to be looking at open badges from that lens as an evaluator. Open badges, from what I've heard today and from what I've read, it's really an exciting development in improving credentialing practices that has the potential to provide more accurate and useful information about competencies and facilitating a new pathway for modern learners in workforce development. As an aside, a lot of the work I do, it's with people very distant from the labor market. I'm with the BC Centre for Employment Excellence. Open badges, I think, very much still in its formative years, and the work so far have focused very much on the operational levels to distribution and ensuring that badges are valued and accepted by learners. So it hasn't really been, in my opinion, universally embraced yet, especially I think it's still pretty new in Canada. And to quote Hickey, Willis, and Quick in their article, while numerous digital badge systems are functioning in many contexts, badges are still not widely valued by admissions or hiring offices. So what do we know and what do we need to know? How do we know that open badges are achieving its goals and the desired effects? How do you build recognition for the badges and build this value proposition and relevance? To do that, you need evidence. And that means you need data. And I have to confess, I'm a bit of a data geek, but I also tell stories. And my favorite story is a discussion I've had with a practitioner. We were developing a research and innovation project. She cared a lot about program development and about the operations, but not so much about the research. So when I asked her, how would you know that it works? She said very confidently, I know, I run programs. And I said, you don't really know because you don't have any evidence to back up your claim. So I think open badges, and I think you all do too, it's very innovative. And every aspect of social innovation needs to be attuned to evidence and a willingness to find out if it's effective and what impacts are achieved. That doesn't always mean randomized controlled trials or costly evaluations, but it does require much more to embed analysis into the everyday work of organizations and promoting an understanding of how to discover what works, where, when, and for whom. You need data to look and learn and link success to evidence of impact. And as the word bubble on the slide suggests, it can be broken down into many exciting things, including evidence, learning, adjustments, continuous improvements, systematic assessments, information for decision making, and collaboration. And more significantly, all of this embedded in a learning framework. To get there, you really need to be clear about the goals that you want for open badges and their outcomes. That is the difference that you want to make, the impacts. It's challenging to measure impacts, and sometimes it is a big fuzzy word, but we need to talk about what you want to achieve, and there are different ways to think about impacts and to measure them. Select benefits that are seen to be the most important in defining success, and then plan on what data is needed to measure and to find out if these benefits have been realized. So, the challenge. What can we do to take the evidence, to take badges to another level? Once you actually have appropriate and accurate data, you can use it to target, to build and improve the infrastructure, to fix and improve processes, to identify what can be improved so it can be as successful as possible, to learn what's going well so that these can be continued or even enhanced. And it really helps with program visibility and to celebrate your successes. And to push badges further and to gain more credibility or trust, there needs to be a focus on more the macro initiatives on the other end, which includes the reception of badges by employers, acceptance of credentials in the system, and also the collaboration that's needed to move this forward. So learning from what's in place and already working is important for improvements. It also helps to set up a business case for scale and sustainability. So what would inspire you to take action about data? If you don't track and collect key information, you'll never know if open badges are doing what they're supposed to do and why not. The inspiration for you to evaluate means having the data to tell the success stories of badges and its achievements. To quote Winston Churchill to end, to improve is to change. To be perfect is to change often. And I say you don't need to be perfect, but you need to have, especially at this stage, continuous improvements. And to do this, you need to know what your outcomes are that you want to achieve and to collect the data in order to demonstrate the impacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Next up is Victor Glickman from Edudata Canada.
Hello. In a minute or two, or 30 seconds or two, I work with different organizations in different sectors of the broad education system, formal and informal. And I look at it as a relationship in my work, micro-credentials and learning management systems. Many organizations that are teaching and learning work in a space where there's a culture about curriculum, a culture about power and politics, a culture about information systems that serve many needs, but may not give a non-traditional understanding of what people can do. And you've heard some of the speakers today in different ways talk about can do for different reasons. And so if I go to the next picture, I think it's important to think that there is a world of elements of learning, and all of you, because of your professional experiences and personal experiences, are going to have your views of elements. But many people today, speaking to you and speaking with you, have hinted at number 2 about pathways. All of you have talked about competencies from time to time. Badges is there. Not often do we hear about resources. But what I'm trying to say is in the learning environment, all these pieces work together. And learning management systems are one of many choices of vehicles to capture the teaching and learning experience. In British Columbia, as one of our colleagues this morning was talking about, the new curriculum and the opportunities that it brings to the education system. And I won't restate it other than to say that the opportunity and the challenge is we have curriculum, it's been reshaped, but can people articulate what the learner can do? Because it's, when all of you are building curriculum, it's often easy to build a story that's on the 25th level of an organization, and the student is at the levels 2, 3, and 4 in the beginning and going up. So I emphasize can do in every context that I work in. And I have a few examples. We're working with young adults for inclusion in employment. And one of the sad narratives we have in Canada is young men and women leave our secondary school system. They were young adults with intellectual disabilities, and too often, and when I say too often, I'm talking about overwhelmingly too often, they and their families and the organizations they're going to work with don't know what the individual can do. So the idea of can do is really, really important in different contexts. When you imagine what the public investment has been associated with these individuals and the challenge when they make a transition to other venues, when they leave the public education system. My friend, Ms. Twist, gave an excellent story about Dakota. If I reflected on it, I'd add to her story by saying this. They knew what they were doing. They were doing it well, but they were the only people who knew what they were doing. So when, that's a different secret. But when my colleague Susanna Lui Gurr talked about data, you know, this was a kind of a secondary but essential element of the adult literacy challenges in British Columbia, which is great people trying to solve tremendous challenges for people who really want to move somewhere. And this ability to talk about a credential has not changed adult education or public education in British Columbia, but it's an important first step to deal with the challenge of recognizing where we are and what the gaps are. So being able to count is really, really important, and learning management systems along with micro-credentials, one way or another, are essential to do the counting. Down the road from here is the Pacific Autism Family Network. And we're working with them to do credentials in relationship to their workplace training that they're doing in their organization. Once again, they need a space for a learning management system for their environment, and they need credentials. Many of the post-secondary institutions that you work in may use Canadian language benchmarks as a screening tool for applicants to enter the institution. Well, I'm just pointing to, we have can-do statements all around us. We just might lose sight of them. And so it isn't just non-standard, non-formal education that's afoot in this area. I wanted to give you an example of what can-do can mean in a secondary school mathematics term. So column 1 and column 2 talk about what the new BC curriculum is about in a very narrow area. I got the wrong picture? No? Okay. Column 1 and column 2, thank you. Column 1 and 2, column 1 says fluently and flexibly use mathematical concepts, procedures, and facts. So that's the area. The curriculum standard says estimate reasonably developmental math strategies, etc. The key to micro-credentials is column 3. And it's hard work to get to column 3. But it's the student speaking, what can I do? We have wonderful curriculum in Canada for column 1 and 2. We don't have such good curriculum in Canada for column 3. We don't work to articulate, and it's not part of our culture or our tradition. It also avoids when the learner actually can already do it. So you have a classroom, many classrooms of 20 children, some working at a grade 5 level, some working at grade 6 level, some working at a grade 7 level, and depending on the talent of the teacher, where are they going with that group of students? Teachers speak, I support your learning too statement. So it's not just a piece of information for the individual student, it also is about the pedagogy, the teaching and learning, and the role of an educator. And the last column is questions from to prompt, asking questions back that supports recognition of what the child can do. I'll give you a couple more examples. In mental health, or in work-ready skills, or in information technology, these may be generalized statements of can do, but you can see different settings where these generalized statements might be useful and applicable for a teaching and learning situation. The learning management system part, if you look over to the case notes example, if you're in a can-do environment and in a micro-credential environment, you can have case notes that talk about how that learner is proceeding and what your pedagogy is. 25% of students in the public education system change schools more than twice a year, usually because of social and poverty issues. But do we know what their learning styles are? Do we know what they've achieved to date? A very problematic world when we look at the student information systems versus learning management systems that they might need. And I'm going to stop there because that's my excitement. So I enjoy working with organizations that want to take up the challenge of saying, we know what we're doing and we'd like to move to can-do statements and micro-credentials along with learning management. Having the credential without learning management gives you a charming experience that you will never be able to understand the impact of. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Victor. And I believe next up is Nate.
Cool. Thanks again, Don, for having me and inviting me to provide a provocation. So what I'd like to talk today is about the idea of a learning recognition network. That we've talked a little bit about how you use badges, what those badges should be, and I want to talk a little bit about who uses badges. I hinted at this a little bit this morning. It's very important that you build the right users and the right roles into your badging program. The design of your program is just as much about the learning claims that you're making with badges and the assessment practices that your team will be executing as you issue badges, as it is about the users who are occupying the other roles in your ecosystem. And so this definition and slight explanation was proposed by my colleague Dan Hickey about what it takes to make up a learning recognition network, which is a network where common technologies are used to enable the understanding of learning that is happening in your community. And so he says, I'll just read it here, because he wrote it very well. By embracing common standards that allow claims and evidence that support those claims to flow readily across platforms and systems, a true learning recognition network emerges. Such LRNs are made up of people and organizations that use interoperable technology built upon open standards to issue, share, verify, and understand records of learning happening in that network. So, like we saw with the Siemens example, it's not the technology, it's how you use it. The technology needs to be there and needs to be developed. We're at a sort of a young phase in the Open Badges world still. Open Badges have been around for 5 years. They'll be around for a lot more than 5 years in the future. But we need to be building together the technology and the practices and the roles and the people together. And so I encourage you, as you think about the ways that you will use Open Badges to perform learning recognition in your networks, that you also think about who it is that needs to be using these tools. And that means the staff members in your organization who will be performing different steps, such as defining badges and assessing learning, as well as the students who will be earning the badges and sharing them out. And then very importantly, you've got to have the stakeholder perspective of those who will be consuming the badges, understanding that learning and turning it back into some kind of real world opportunity. It's not until you have a collection of all three of these roles occupied and common technology that lays the foundation for you to understand learning that you can actually have that common ground to just understand the learning that's happening in your network. One other thing I'd like to show is another example of how we can build common technology around badges that connects badges in a community. This is an early prototype design from something we're working on for the Badger software under the heading of learning pathways. We're allowing users to define their badges and issue their badges. That's a very easy, simple process. But also we want to allow users to define the underlying meaning that connects those badges back to the values that they represent in the real world. A badge itself is not a competency. It's a pointer to a competency. A competency is something, it's a definition that's shared in a community that has common understanding between the educators, the learners, and the employers who would like to, consume that information about competency and turn it into opportunities for users. Our systems that we're building, and we hope to make this an open standard that'll be implemented across the badges ecosystem, just like Open Badges is an open standard. But the users of our system will be able to define these tools and then use them to track individual and group progress through a landscape of learning, where the badges along the different points on a pathway might be issued by many different organizations in your learning recognition network. Not just your organization, but other stakeholders that are providing complementary learning. Create networks where learners can show what the connections are between the different opportunities that they participate in, and then present those tools together on a map where you have community understanding. This is a set of skills in my industry or in my province where we are wanting to track together achievements along these specific definitions. So I'll close with a beautiful puppy as I finish. My provocation is to think about who your users are and to think about how you can work together with all of the stakeholders in the system. Don't approach Open Badges just as something that you will do, to students or for students. Approach Open Badges as something that you'll do with students, and understand that at different times in your progress, you'll be occupying multiple different roles in the ecosystem. You'll be an issuer of badges or an endorser of badges. As those features develop, you'll be an earner of these tokens of recognition, and you will also be a recognizer of others' learning. And that's what makes a learning recognition network. Looking forward to having conversations with all of you. Don is participating, Dan Hickey, a bunch of us are trying to flesh out the meaning of what is a learning recognition network, how do we build it, and what are the specific tools that we implement to make sure that they're successful. Thanks.
So I don't know about you people, but my mind is exploding. I wanted to sort of again sweep up and just give you some examples of learning recognition networks that are beginning to emerge and possibly to give us some ideas. Not any one of these is necessarily perfect, but some different approaches to similar issues. The first one I want to show you here is the 21st Century Badging Challenge. And this is put on by the Education Design Lab. And it began in the sort of Washington, D.C. area. So George Mason University, I think Mary Washington is in there. But then University of Arizona, University of Virginia are involved. Basically, what they wanted to do was a deep learning approach to getting students to think through soft skills that they would use in their careers. And each institution has taken on one of these things. And part of the problem with soft skills is people keep on defining them differently, you know, the different categories, et cetera. It's like trying to nail Jello to a wall. But these are the ones that they came up with. And so the Catalyst one is one that I'm going to be talking about at Waterloo a little later this month in more detail. But essentially, they get students to engage within this co-curricular activity, this extracurricular activity, to build themselves up as entrepreneurs. It could be social entrepreneurs or whatever. And they state their goals, and then they're assessed. So they get like a 360 assessment, and they also do one of these DISC things. That's kind of like a Myers-Briggs thing, where you basically look at yourself and see, you know, have I nailed myself or not? And gosh, you know, I thought I was strong in this area. I'm not so strong in this area. I should work on this. And then they work over a course of 6 weeks, and end up do a personal learning thing, and then end up with making a presentation at the end. And based on that, they get their Catalyst badge. So I think this is an interesting approach, and I think it's kind of interesting all these different institutions are involved in developing this and building a consensus around it. So you see some of the university partners and employer partners over on the right. Colorado is a really interesting model. This is more on the level of statewide. The Colorado government is involved in this. The Advanced Manufacturing Alliance in Colorado, the Technology Association, Aurora Public Schools, Colorado Community College System, and then the Colorado State University. It's not there yet, but these pieces are starting to move in among each other, and they're taking a clustered approach, a sectoral career cluster model approach, and they're trying to find the commonalities around that on a statewide level. They actually were almost able to get some legislation passed in the state legislature supporting this, but then time got in the way and it didn't happen. We've mentioned cities of learning, learning without the vowels. Going across the country. That's another example of a learning network. I think particularly among that is the Pittsburgh, the Sprout Learning Fund, the Remake Learning folks, among which you'll see those cards on the tables. That's a really interesting model to follow. Great ways of engaging employers, bringing them into venues like this and getting them to say what skills they want and what would demonstrate those skills. And I think that's a really good model to follow. Ireland is developing, this is more on the post-secondary side, but a common approach to digital skills framework that they would recognize among each other. And some great work coming out of the UK began with openbadgenetwork.com, coming out of the Digital Me background. This is an EU project. Over on the right is a mapping of, this is, I think Grania Hamilton was responsible for this, basically mapping the network and just putting the nodes there and just having a look at it and seeing, how do we connect? How could we connect? Just the visualization of that, I think, is amazingly powerful. This is an incredibly complicated slide that I presented 2 years ago in Barcelona, but it's actually led to a project, I think. And basically, humanitarian learning, Doctors Without Borders, I do some work with them. They have a very federated system. There are 5 international operational centers, huge autonomy, and big silos between them. Other agencies are coming into the thing, and people work from agency to agency, from operations center to operations center. They have some formal learning that come in with. This goes way beyond health sector occupations. It's logistics, it's security, it's leadership, etc. The learning right now is tracked very poorly, and a lot of people are still stuck in that 10% mindset, not the 20, not the 70, and they realize they need to change. And so there are a couple of projects that are starting up using badges as, what does Dan Hickey call them? Crossing borders, what is it? Boundary objects. They cross boundaries. So That's getting underway in a couple of projects. Another complicated slide here. Lumina is very interesting in this regard. They've got the connecting credentials. It's a beta credentials framework that makes me think of the EQF and the Australian qualifications framework, because they talk about levels of complexity. This credential transparency initiative, credentialing engine, that idea is the idea of a central registry of competencies, and can we, does my competency map to yours, et cetera. They're trying to set up an infrastructure around that. NW3C is basically, that's on the level of, I claim to be this, and that's a piece of the puzzle. So my identity is back upable. That is making its way through the W3C as we speak. Just to close, I think I'm closing with this. In Bologna, the last ePortfolio and Identity conference that we held in October, we declared the Bologna Open Recognition Declaration. And what this is to have a common framework for open recognition. And we encourage everybody to have a look at it. If you agree with it, to sign it. And if you sign it, you're able to claim this badge saying that you too are on board with the Bologna Open Recognition Declaration. And Nate and myself and 2 other people are founding members of the Open Recognition Alliance. And we just actually had a badge community, a community call this Wednesday. They happen bi-weekly. And we welcome people to join us on these calls as we look at badges and other technologies as tools and a language for recognizing what each other can do. Now we have a break for 15 minutes, roughly. We'll pick up at 1:45. Thank you.